Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and today I wanted to kind of put you to sleep with a nice video talking about the chaos damage meta and things to do with chaos damage and what, the chaos damage problem is right now and why it's so popular in its current form in endgame maps, among streamers, among top build races, all that sort of thing. First and foremost, I kind of hate the word meta. I don't know. It just kind of fits though. Kind of have to use it. Meta just refers to what's popular, what's trendy in the game right now, in reference to, what recently changed, the patches, all that sort of thing. It's just the build meta, or, what skills are popular, what builds are popular. And at the moment, one of the most popular things to do is chaos damage. And that mostly refers to Voltaxic and consuming darks, because those are the easiest ways to get chaos damage and to get good chaos damage. So Voltaxic allows you to build a good lightning arrow character or any sort of actual bow character in general, lightning arrow just being the strongest choice, or go full lightning spells like Spark being one of the most flavor of the month and fastest clearing spells at the moment. Pair it with Voltaxic and you got yourself one of the safest, fastest clearing builds out there. The other end of the spectrum, you got your Consuming Darks. So Consuming Darks convert 50% of your fire into chaos, where two of them ends up being 100%. Now that's even nerfed from last patch where it was actually stronger. It used to be 75%, so it was easier to build around them. That nerf did nothing, because now you just wear two if you want to get 100%, and that's still really easy to do. And you can still really easily build around that. And that largely comes from the introduction of ascendancies and a lot of other skill gems that get changed over the years or time. And just in general, things get easier to build chaos damage. So the things I'm going to go over are why chaos damage is what it is, and that's largely because of map mods, because of gem changes, because of ascendancies, certain skills getting buffed. It just kind of turns into chaos damage being really OP. I'll try and come up with a few solutions, but I'm not sure I have them. In any case, I'll get straight to it. I'll start off by just going over, basically, in the past, chaos damage. There's been a few changes to the passive tree to facilitate chaos damage a bit better. This node over here gives a bit of chaos damage. These over here give more chaos damage. There's some good chaos damage nodes here. There's a few over here. And also poison got completely reworked. At the moment, poison is still really strong, but I don't think it's the actual problem for chaos damage meta and builds. It's just a strong perk that you can get on top of all of your chaos damage, and in some cases, like the Bladefall Mine poison stuff, it can be really strong, and it can help you kill Uber at Zero, for example, but in general for mapping and pushing ladder and all that, and what creates these meta builds, I don't think poison is really the problem, especially in its current iteration where it did get kind of nerfed. So the passive tree does have a lot more chaos damage than it used to, but even that's not really the problem. It kind of, builds towards the problem, but I'm not sure that's really what's going on. I think the main thing that's happening is ascendancies. Chaos damage basically used to be really niche. It used to be a hard thing to build, and it used to be barely worthwhile. We'd really have to think, am I going to invest all of this gear, passives, etc. into trying to make a chaos damage build? And usually it was barely worth it, and like if we take our friend Voltaxic for example, it basically hasn't changed in the past 2 or whatever years. It has gained 1% base crit to its crit chance as a bow, just because spine bows got buffed from 5 to 6. Otherwise, Voltaxic's always pretty much been the same. And Voltaxic Split Arrow used to be somewhat of a popular build, on hardcore especially, because it was reflect immune, it did some okay damage, and it was, I don't know, a gimmick I guess. The damage was kinda shit compared to real bow builds, because you'd have to build non-crit, because there was no way to facilitate a nice crit build. And it didn't have much stopping power. It was basically just there because it was immune to reflect. And that was the only perk of it. And that was one of the only ways to build chaos damage back then. You had your Voltaxic, you had your Poison Arrow. That's essentially it. You had a chaos damage gem, but, you know, you couldn't really scale too much. So what's happening these days, though, is you got your 6 crit. That's not really much of a difference anymore. You could still make amazing Voltaxic builds even if it was 5 base crit. But what's actually happening is a lot of gems just keep getting, like, just flat sort of damage increases, multipliers. You got your Pierce gem. Didn't used to have 30% more damage, did it? All of a sudden it's got 30% more. That scales all your chaos damage, right? So does, let's say, I don't think I have another example. Well, Void Manipulation, that's another gem that came in, gives you a huge amount of more chaos damage. But Slower Projectiles gives similar to Pierce as well. Slower Projectiles also gives like 30% more damage. Just a bunch of things like this now give more and more and more damage, which means you can actually scale chaos damage easier and easier, on top of all the shit from your passive tree and ascendancies. Like, you look at my Deadeye ascendancy here and you got yourself proj damage, 30% more proj damage from further away, more proj damage, and then just other additional perks, area, skill, extra additional projectile, accuracy. Then you got proj damage, attack speed, proj damage, attack speed. All in all, just as a pure chaos build, Deadeye gives me like an extra 40-50% damage. So then when you build chaos, you go for all these general nodes. Projectile damage, these are stronger than they've ever been before. You've got all these like chaos damage nodes here. You've got general projectile damage nodes there. You've got these strong general projectile damage nodes here. And it also brings me to my next point. These general life leech nodes didn't used to ever exist. Now they are attack damaged as life and mana leeched as life. So essentially, blood magic is worth less than ever before, meaning you free up extra mana to have more links. So you don't... I'm talking more about the gem itself. You don't have to actually use blood magic gem pretty much ever anymore, because getting mana leech is such a goddamn joke that you can always have 6 links focused strictly on damage, especially with Vitality Void or certain other things like Berserker from Ascendant. Let's pull that up. Essentially means your 6 link can always be focused on damage. So that means you can scale your chaos absolutely insanely compared to what it used to be able to do. Which is pretty crazy. Because you now have just more damage everywhere, essentially, that'll apply to chaos. You got your Pierce gem, you got your Slow Proj gem, you got Empowers, you got your Void Manipulations, you got chaos damage from the tree, you got all sorts of ascendancies that give you roughly 40 to 50% damage for the good ones. Alright? So all that combined means you can actually build really effective chaos damage characters, and there's no real drawback to it. So what used to be the drawback to building these chaos damage characters is, well, it's really hard to build, and it wouldn't necessarily make sense as a damage perspective because you'd have less damage, you'd have more utility and safety based off of your chaos damage not being able to reflect back to you. These days that's not the case, so you can build your Spark character, you can build your Voltaxic character, or you can have your very nice Val Molten Shell character. We got one of those trees up. I think it's low life stuff. Nah, that ain't right. Low life VMS. I did pull one of those up. Yeah. So the damage scales pretty insanely, and because of poison, because of chaos scaling insanely, because of being immune to reflect, in general these builds are pretty goddamn easy to actually build. So that allows you to focus largely on other defenses and things like that, and ends up just making for a really strong build. So the first wave of problems is it's actually really easy to build chaos compared to what it used to be, so there's no real downside to it anymore. The chaos niche used to be hard to build, somewhat of a drawback in terms of lower damage, more safety. Nowadays, you still have the same amount of damage as everything else, you have much more safety, and you have more utility in terms of getting rid of map mods. So the next most important thing I really want to talk about is map mods. That's basically where chaos damage really comes into its own. I think absolutely the biggest reason chaos damage and all these builds are so popular, especially for map pushing and ladder pushing and racing, is because of map mods. Essentially, a lot of builds can do most map mods, and they can do almost every map mod, but nothing does it as easy as Chaos, and nothing has a more joke of a time rolling maps than Chaos. And that becomes a real problem when you're actually trying to push ladder, and you need to sustain high level maps, and you need to spend a lot of currency on maps. So you got, you know, this is actually a really good alc. Essentially what you're looking for in maps is high pack size and high quantity. And the higher pack size and quantity you get on your maps, the easier it is going to be to sustain, because you get more returns from them. Now, Chaos Damage maps basically give a fuck about no map mods. That's actually a real shame to try and reroll and grab another map to, I don't know, throw a few things at. Yeah. Currently my build, my Vortex build, gives a shit about no mods whatsoever. So I don't have to reroll anything ever. Most other builds will probably have to reroll 1 or 2 mods. Maybe 3 or 4. Elemental builds in particular are going to have to at least worry about a lot of mods, let alone reroll several. Physical builds probably going to at least reroll Fizz Reflect or Vulnerability, whereas Chaos doesn't care about anything. And you might think 1 or 2 mods is not a big deal, but it really starts to stack up when you're rolling hundreds of maps, putting in hundreds of Chaos into every map, and also Varlorbing certain maps. And with Chaos Damage builds, Varlobs don't have any negative consequence, except for maybe not rolling enough mods. Because usually you Varlob and you get something like 7 or 8 properties on a map, and it would be pretty disgusting. If you're an Elemental build and you roll Elemental Reflect on that map, you're probably screwed and you can't run that map, and holy shit, there goes an entire bunch of Chisels, Chaos, maybe even the entire map. Same with Fizz Reflect. If you are a Fizz build, you get Fizz Reflect, you're screwed there. If you're a Fizz build and you get Fizz Reflect plus Vulnerability, you're extra screwed. If you're an Ellie build, you get Ellie Reflect plus minus max, you're extra screwed. You just can't run those maps, whereas Chaos just has to tread a bit more carefully around minus max or vulnerability, but Reflect really doesn't matter. So it just becomes completely unfair when rolling maps. Like Elemental Weakness, chances are you're going to be over-capped anyway when pushing for this stuff, but Chaos doesn't really care about Ellie Weakness when it's coming into contact with Reflect mobs in that map. You have no extra added danger from that, whereas an Elemental build will be scared of that if you're not fully capped. There's all kinds of shit you actually have to worry about these days. Immune to elemental status ailments. It does affect my Voltaxic, for example, a bit because I can't shock, but it's not that big a deal, whereas for Elemental builds, not having status ailments means you can't freeze, means you can't shock, means you can't ignite. That's a pretty big deal for a lot of builds. But to name all the mods that matter for an Elemental build, it's just insane. You got your fire, your lightning, your cold resist, 80 to each. That basically makes them super tanky to any one of those mods. And if it's your build's mod, then you're screwed. Elemental Equilibrium, that's pretty huge for almost every elemental build, except for an Inquisitor. Then you got your Ellie Reflect, your minus max. In Feeble, you really start to notice because a lot of monsters are very elemental resistant. I don't know, that's just 7 mods I can count off the top of my head. Physical sort of builds tend to not have as much, but Fizz Reflect, you typically won't ever run that. So if you have a perfect map with 40 quantity, 100 pack size, and it's got Fizz Reflect on it, you're screwed, you're probably re-rolling it. If it's got Vulnerability on there as well, that means pretty much no Fizz builds ever running that. Even if you have Varpact, even if you have good defenses, even if you have good Life Leech, you're just not doing it. Ellie Reflect, usually most Fizz builds wouldn't want to do Ellie Reflect either on a map because you do a lot of elemental damage. You might have to take off your auras, then you would just be a gimped build. Can't think of too many others, but essentially it's just the map mod problem. And there's no real easy fix. Yeah, you could add Chaos Reflect on a map, but no one really wants to see that happen. Could you add Chaos Resist? I think that could be kind of a solution because there are certain monsters in the game that are fairly Chaos Resistant. You take your Poijo's map, the Corpse Explosion guys from that map are very Chaos Resistant, and if you're a Chaos build, you will notice it. Right now I have a fair amount of overkill damage with my Voltaxic build, but I don't really notice it too much, but they do definitely still survive more than anything else, which is crazy. So Chaos Resist could actually be something. No one really wants to see Chaos Reflect come into play though, because that just becomes another whole thing. I think the current meta or entire shift of the game is more so towards removing Reflect altogether, because most builds don't really worry about it anyway. Because you're not running a Reflect map for starters, if you're any build that's not Chaos. Usually you're just not going to do it because it's not smart to do, it's not very worth doing. If you're Chaos, you don't care about that anyway. Single target Reflect mobs are just there to piss you off, essentially if you have too much damage from, say, an Abyssus, or if you're running a minus max map as an Ellie character. So, kind of, I think it's probably time to remove Reflect damage mods, and maybe just increase monster life across the board, or nerf damage across the board, in that sense. Reflect seems like kind of a dated mechanic for what the game currently is. The other thing you could tackle this problem with is maybe add something like Thorns instead of Reflect, because Thorns is a universal thing, as everyone will know. Thorns from, let's say, the Aziri Trio Dual Striker, or the Promenade boss, which no one really cares about anyway because it's too weak. Thorns is a universal thing, which will affect Chaos damage builds, it will affect Fizz, it will affect Elemental. And then that actually becomes a bit more balanced, and Chaos actually has something to worry about. But what it really comes down to is, yeah, Ascendancies have just made building Chaos too strong and too easy. As you guys may remember from my previous character, the not low life, it was just a Chaos Wander. So essentially I just scaled Chaos entirely for this Wander off of Crown of Eyes, spell damage, general 1 damage nodes, crit multi, proj damage, and mostly proj damage, right? And all of my Chaos damage came from a Chaos damage gem in my Link setup. That was all of it, and that was like 10,000 Chaos damage or something on the tooltip. It was insane for what it was, and it's just too easy to make it happen. And to me, this character felt pretty much more worth it than any other Wanderer played, because it's half Fizz, it's half Chaos. So I barely have to worry about Elemental Reflect at all, barely have to worry about Physical Reflect, and it's very strong damage because it penetrates resistances. There's hardly anything Chaos resistant. Physical resistance doesn't really matter because I have all that Chaos. I got Poison as well, which is then stacking a lot and killing things immediately. Essentially, Chaos just becomes too good because of Ascendancies, and because of all the extra perks that have been added over time, like Mana Leech, Life Leech, more damage on gems, all of that crazy nonsense. And it's not really the item's faults anymore, it's just the power creep and the way Chaos was originally designed to be a niche damage type that had some trade-offs. No longer are there trade-offs, it's just the best type of damage you can possibly deal, and it's very realistically buildable. That's why all of these guys that are going to be pushing ladders are going to be playing your Voltaxics or your Chaos Val Molten Shells, because they're very fast builds and they're very safe against every single map mod, which means you don't have to roll shit. And you'll get lots of returns, and you won't spend a lot of time rolling your maps, and you won't spend a lot of currency rolling your maps. And they're just fast, safe builds. Something like an Elementalist, especially for Chaos, has just changed the game entirely for all these Chaos builds, like Val Molten Shell, since Elemental Conflicts applies to every damage type. So if you deal your 10k Chaos damage, for example, you're going to get a 10k's worth of Ignite, Shock, Chill. That's pretty damn OP. I don't know if that's something that needs changing, but just Ascendancies across the board have brought Chaos up to a ridiculous level, and it's just, at this point, map mods that are standing in the way of other builds performing at similar levels. I feel anyway. Map mods and certain resistances on bosses and stuff are just very strong and really deter you from making an elemental build. I will mention, Inquisitor goes past all of the resistances, and they can perform really well in endgame maps. The problem there being, running a reflect map or a minus max reflect map becomes pretty sketchy, And it's hard to build an Inquisitor focusing on Inevitable Judgment. Because Templar is so out of the way for most damage builds, we're talking bow, wand, reeve, swords, daggers, spectral throws, you know, all of that sort of shit. Bow, I think I said bow, you know, whatever. You can make it, but it's so far out of the way that you have to do a fair amount of traveling, and in the end, you will need a lot of accuracy on gear, a lot of crit on gear, a lot of crit multi, wed, whatever. You're going to need a lot of stuff. It ends up being quite expensive, and it's a lot harder to build a good Inquisitor that focuses on this node and actually bypasses some certain, you know, most dangerous defensive map mods in the end game for Elemental, that it's just nowhere near worth it compared to building a Chaos build, which is shit easy and will ignore every map mod, including the reflects and the minus maxes. So it just becomes a bit more of a problem that even certain classes can't really fix. Because given the choice to push for ladder or to, you know, make an easy character and make a strong character, 9.9 times out of 10 you're going to be going Chaos if you know what's good for you. And that's a bit of a problem, because it just isn't really that much fun being pigeonholed into a certain type of build every single time you play it. So that has been basically my rant, or discussion, one-way vlog discussion, whatever you want to call it, about Chaos damage. I'm not sure if they're going to change anything about this in the future. I would hope they do. I don't know what the answer is, like I said at this point. It probably has something to do with map mods, whether it's removing Reflect, adding Chaos Resist. Not sure that's going to solve anything. Changing certain mechanics like Thorns to Reflect, Reflect to Thorns, I don't know. Or just overall nerfing certain gems, certain skills, certain items. I would be sad to see something like Voltaxic get nerfed, because it's been the same as it always has been, like I said, for a few years now, and it's not really the problem. The items don't seem to really be the problems, it's just the scaling around the items that has become too good. Anyway, that was my wall of text in voice version. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it gave you something to think about. Maybe you got some other ideas. By no means is this the right opinion. It's just my opinion. You may think differently, and you may think I'm entirely wrong. That is completely okay, and I'm okay with that. So thanks for watching. Discuss away, and I'll see you guys next time.